The clink of metal echoed through the cold, concrete corridor as the guards made their rounds. Cell 214 sat in the farthest wing of Holman Correctional Facility in Alabama, a place where time moved like molasses, thick and slow, heavy with regret. Inside sat a man most had forgotten, Jimmy Rayburn, 62 years old, with skin like worn leather and hands that trembled more from memory than age. Jimmy hadn't always been just an inmate. Once, a long time ago, he was a son, a soldier, a husband, even a father. But that was before 1989. Before the incident. Before a single night tore through decades of family love like a tornado across a quiet field. Now he rarely spoke. The other inmates called him the Ghost, not just for his pale eyes, but for the way he drifted, in and out of conversations, in and out of relevance. His cell was bare, except for a stack of old letters he never opened and a tiny radio that crackled gospel hymns late into the night. But today was different. For the first time in 15 years, Jimmy's name was called from the chapel intercom. Rayburn. Art program. You're up. He blinked, startled. Art? He didn't draw. Didn't paint. What the hell did they want with him? Still, something stirred. A memory, faint as mist on a pond, the smell of turpentine in his mother's kitchen, her soft hands guiding his as a boy. Before Vietnam. Before prison. For reasons he couldn't explain, Jimmy stood up. The art room didn't look like much. A converted classroom with flickering fluorescent lights, metal stools, and cracked linoleum floors. Still, it smelled different: paint, pencil shavings, old wood. It wasn't prison air. It was something softer. Something human. Jimmy shuffled in, his prison blues loose on his frame. At the front stood a woman in her mid-60s, gray curls framing a gentle face. She wore a cardigan the color of sunshine and eyes that held no judgment, only patience. "I'm Miss Evelyn," she said, her southern accent soft like a lullaby. "Welcome to the Tuesday afternoon art class." There were 6 other inmates in the room, mostly younger men, inked arms, tough faces, side eyes that said don't get too close. Jimmy didn't sit near any of them. He chose the back corner, beside a window painted shut. Miss Evelyn handed him a blank canvas and a worn paintbrush. "Just let your hands talk," she said kindly. "Don't think so much." He stared at the canvas. Blank. Like his mind. Like his life. "What if I ain't got nothing to say?" he muttered. She didn't flinch. Just smiled. "Then let the silence paint it for you." The room settled into a quiet hum of brush strokes and pencil scribbles. Jimmy held the brush like it might bite him. Then, slowly, he dipped it in blue. Just a line. Across the white. Shaky. Uncertain. But it was a start. And for the first time in decades, Jimmy Rayburn didn't feel invisible. Days passed, then weeks. Jimmy kept going back. At first, he painted quietly. Shapes without names. Colors without meaning. Blues, grays, deep reds like rust or blood. He didn't talk, didn't share, but Miss Evelyn always stopped by his table. She never pushed. One Tuesday afternoon, he painted a barn. It wasn't perfect, slanted roof, lopsided doors, but it came from somewhere deep. As he laid down strokes of brown and gold, a memory crawled to the surface, his father's voice, shouting across the Alabama heat. "Get them damn chickens in, Jimmy boy, before the storm hits." Jimmy's hand trembled. He added storm clouds above the barn. Real ones. The kind that tore roofs off in 1971. Miss Evelyn walked by and studied the painting without speaking. "You remember that place?" she finally asked. He nodded, almost ashamed. "My daddy's farm. About 20 miles outside of Opelika. Long gone now." "That where you grew up?" "Yeah." His voice cracked like old wood. "Before the war. Before everything went sideways." Miss Evelyn rested a gentle hand on the corner of his canvas. "You carry a lot of stories, Jimmy. You ever think about telling 'em?" He shook his head. Ain't nobody wants to hear from a man like me. But that night, back in cell 214, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. And for the first time in 30 years, he thought about writing a letter. The prison mailroom hadn't seen Jimmy Rayburn's handwriting in decades. He sat at the tiny desk in his cell, an old legal pad resting on his knees. The lines blurred and jumped under his tired eyes, but he pressed the pen to paper anyway. His hands shook, not from age, but from the weight of what he wanted to say. "Dear Lila," he began. The name hit him like a gut punch. He hadn't said it out loud since '89. "I don't know if you'll ever read this, or if you'd even want to. I don't deserve that much grace. But I need to say some things. Not for me. For you. For her. Her. His daughter, Emily. She was barely 7 the last time he saw her. Pink sneakers, gap in her front teeth, and a laugh that used to echo down their trailer's hallway like church bells on Sunday morning. He paused, pen hovering. "They say a man pays his debt behind bars, but I've learned something else. Sometimes, time doesn't pay the price. Silence does. And I've been silent too long." The letter ran 4 pages. By the end, Jimmy's eyes were wet, his heart thudding like a hammer in his chest. But when the morning came, and the guard slid the mail slot open, Jimmy hesitated. He folded the letter, slipped it into the envelope, then tucked it into the stack of unopened mail at the bottom of his shelf. Maybe tomorrow. Always tomorrow. But that night, when he picked up the brush again, he painted a little girl standing in a field of sunflowers. A new inmate joined the art class the following Tuesday, tall, wiry, and stiff like he still marched in formation. He had a military haircut and knuckles stained red with old scabs. The others gave him space, even the tough ones. He sat across from Jimmy. Didn't speak for the first hour. Just stared at his blank canvas like it had insulted his mother. Miss Evelyn, always gentle, introduced him. "This is Calvin Morris. Served 2 tours in Nam. Just arrived last week." Jimmy glanced up. Something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition? Maybe just respect. Later, during cleanup, Calvin finally muttered, "You were in country?" Jimmy nodded. 69 Phu Bai. 101st Airborne. Calvin gave a grunt. "I was Kisan. 70. Hellhole." Jimmy looked him in the eye. For the first time in years, he saw someone who might understand. "You paint?" Jimmy asked. Calvin shook his head. "I was trained to shoot, not sketch." A pause. Then softer. "But I got memories I'd rather bleed onto a canvas than carry in my gut." From that day, Calvin and Jimmy sat near each other. They didn't talk much. Veterans don't need to. The silence said enough. And slowly, Calvin's canvas began to fill. Explosions in a jungle, a pair of boots in the mud, a helmet lying next to a letter marked "Return to Sender." 2 broken men. Painting their way through the ghosts. By the end of October, Jimmy had filled 5 canvases. Each one a memory, each one a wound stitched with color. There was the barn, the sunflowers, a pair of worn combat boots, and a painting he didn't show anyone, a porch swing with a woman's sweater folded on it. No faces. Just feeling. Miss Evelyn stopped one afternoon, her fingers grazing the edge of his newest piece, a street corner from 1974, with a rusted Chevelle parked in front of a tiny trailer. Jimmy had painted it from memory. The porch light burned soft yellow, just like it had on the night he brought his baby daughter home from the hospital. "This one," she said, voice catching. "This one feels like a story." Jimmy looked down. "It was." Miss Evelyn leaned closer. "Would you mind if I submitted this one to the local community gallery show? They're doing a veterans tribute. Might do some good, Jimmy. Remind folks that even in here there's life." He stared at her, unsure. The idea of the outside world seeing a piece of him, his past, his pain, made his stomach twist. But then he nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "Let it go." 2 weeks later, the painting was hanging in a downtown Montgomery art space. 3 people cried in front of it. One of them was a woman named Emily Rose Whitaker, who hadn't said her father's name aloud in 25 years. Emily stood frozen in the gallery, her eyes locked on the painting. She hadn't planned to stop by. She was only there to support a coworker, to kill an hour before picking up her son from baseball. But when she turned that corner and saw the porch, the cheval, the way the light touched the screen door, something inside her cracked open like thunder over a still lake. She stepped closer, drawn in by the details only someone who lived it would know. The rust on the bumper. The dent from her tricycle. The crooked wind chimes her mom hung the day they brought her home. And in the bottom corner of the canvas, barely legible, J. Rayburn. Emily's breath caught. No. It couldn't be. She hadn't heard from her father since 1989. After the arrest, the trial, and the whispers, her mother had packed up and vanished. Changed their last name. Told Emily he was gone. Dead, maybe? Or worse. But that signature. She blinked back tears, her hand hovering near the frame like she was reaching through time. "Excuse me," she whispered to the gallery docent. "Do you know who painted this?" The woman smiled. "Yes, it was submitted by a prison art program. From Holman. All veteran inmates. That one's by James Rayburn." Emily stepped back, lightheaded. For 25 years she'd buried the name. But now, her father had spoken, not with words. With color. Emily sat in her car outside the gallery, engine running, hands locked at 10 and 2. James Rayburn. She hadn't spoken his name since she was a child. Her mother, Lila, had done everything to erase him. No pictures, no stories, not even a grave to visit. "Some men," she used to say, "belong in the past where they can't hurt nobody no more." But this painting. That porch wasn't just any porch. It was their porch. And no one but Jimmy Rayburn could have remembered it that way. Emily didn't know how to feel. Anger? Maybe. But also, something softer. A pull. Like a thread in the fabric of her heart was being tugged for the first time in decades. She thought about her own son, Aaron. He was 14 now. Headstrong. Curious. Always asking about his grandfather. What happened to him? He'd asked just last week. She'd given the usual answer. He left when I was little. Not a lie. But not the truth either. Now, the truth had a brushstroke. That night, while Aaron slept, Emily sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. She typed Holman Correctional Facility, art program into the search bar. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. And then she saw it, a digital flyer for the Veterans Art Outreach. Listed under the participants. James Rayburn, Cell 214. Her hands went to her mouth. He was alive. Holman Correctional didn't make visiting easy. The paperwork was dense, the security checks exhausting. Emily wasn't sure what she expected to find. Maybe an old man filled with bitterness or a stranger with her eyes. But she submitted the request anyway. It took 2 weeks for approval. On a rainy Thursday, she sat in the sterile visitor's room, plastic chair cold beneath her. Around her, families huddled, wives, mothers, a few small children who didn't yet understand what the word sentence meant. The door buzzed. And then he walked in. Jimmy Rayburn had aged like a tree struck by lightning, gnarled, cracked, but somehow still standing. His eyes were the same though. Soft. Haunted. Like he was always looking at a place no one else could see. He stopped short when he saw her. His hand twitched. His lips parted like he meant to speak, but nothing came. "Hi," Emily said, barely above a whisper. Jimmy blinked. "Emily?" The name left his mouth like a prayer. Or a ghost. She nodded. "I saw your painting," she said, voice shaking. "The porch. The car. I remembered it all." Jimmy sat down slowly, afraid she'd vanish if he moved too fast. "I didn't think. I never thought you'd want to see me again." "I didn't," she admitted. "For a long time. But then I did." Silence. And then tears. She reached across the table. Not far, just enough, and he didn't move. He just let them fall. For the first time in 36 years, father and daughter sat in the same room. Not as strangers, but as survivors. That visit was the first of many. They didn't rush. There was no grand reconciliation, only small moments, carefully pieced together like shards of a broken mirror. Emily brought photos of her son, Aaron, and told Jimmy about her mother's struggles after he'd left. About the loneliness that had settled in their home like dust. About the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, wishing her father had been there. Jimmy listened, his throat tight with regret. "I wasn't the man I should have been," he said one afternoon, voice rough like gravel. "I did time on the outside before the war. But the war, it changed everything." He told her about Vietnam, the firefights, the friends who never came home, and the guilt that followed like a shadow. About coming back broken, about losing himself in alcohol and anger. And finally, the night that sent him here, when anger had spun out of control, and a man's life was taken. Emily didn't interrupt. She only held his gaze. "I painted to remember," he whispered. "To hold on to something real. Something good. Because out here," he gestured at the prison walls, "it's easy to forget who you were." She nodded. "And you want to be remembered for who you can be." For the first time, they talked about forgiveness. Not just from each other, but from themselves. Emily soon learned that forgiveness wasn't the only lesson Jimmy had to offer. There was also sacrifice, the kind that never made headlines but shaped lives quietly, painfully. One afternoon, as rain tapped the prison windows, Jimmy told her about his mother, Ethel Rayburn. A small-town woman with strong hands and a stubborn heart. She raised Jimmy and his 3 siblings alone after their father died in a tractor accident, working 2 jobs to keep food on the table. "She never left me," Jimmy said, voice breaking. "Not even when I broke her heart. Not even when I made a mess of my own life." He showed Emily a faded photograph, a young woman with kind eyes, standing by an old farm truck. "She taught me what real strength looked like. Not muscle, but kindness. And faith. Even when life didn't make sense." Emily looked at the photo, feeling the weight of years and love wrapped into one fragile smile. "You carry her in you," Jimmy said, looking up. "Every day, when I paint." Their visits grew longer, deeper. Emily brought Aaron once. The boy hesitated, but Jimmy knelt and showed him how to hold the brush. For a moment, the past and future met in color and hope. In that small room, surrounded by cold walls and cautious hope, a family began to heal. Not every day was gentle or kind. The prison halls were still filled with harsh whispers and wary glances. Some inmates judged Jimmy's new art world, calling it soft, useless, a waste of time. But Jimmy had found something inside the paint, a quiet rebellion against the bitterness that tried to claim him. One afternoon, Calvin approached him during class. "You ever think about what comes next?" Calvin asked, voice low. Jimmy looked up from his canvas. "Next? Yeah. When this place don't have a hold on us anymore." Jimmy shrugged. "I'm too old for next. This might be it." Calvin shook his head. "I got grandkids waiting for me. I'm gonna see 'em grow up. You can too. If you want." That hit Jimmy harder than any guard's cuff. "Maybe I don't deserve that," he said. Calvin smiled, a rare thing. "Maybe you do. It ain't about deserve. It's about fighting for it." Their friendship grew quietly. 2 veterans who'd lost and found pieces of themselves in paint and pain. One evening, after art class, they shared stories of home, the barbershop on Main Street, the diner with the best pecan pie, the simple joys of small-town life they'd left behind. In those moments, prison walls faded, replaced by memories that kept them human. The letter Jimmy had written all those months ago, the one he tucked away and never sent, haunted him. Every brush stroke in his paintings whispered the words he'd never spoken aloud. One day, Miss Evelyn handed him an envelope. "It came back," she said softly. "Your letter to Lila." Jimmy's hands trembled as he broke the seal. The envelope was thick with time, yellowed edges, a return stamp from a small town in Georgia. He read the note inside, brief and cold. James Rayburn, your letter has been received but will not be forwarded. Please do not contact us again. The ache was familiar, rejection, the sting of being forgotten. But Calvin was there. You still got us, he said. And you got your art. Jimmy nodded, swallowing the lump. Maybe some bridges can't be rebuilt. Calvin clapped him on the shoulder. Maybe not. But you can still build a new road. That night, Jimmy painted harder than ever, a winding dirt road, bathed in twilight, leading toward a sunrise he couldn't yet see. That winding dirt road Jimmy painted became a symbol, something more than colors on canvas. It was his promise to himself, a chance to build something new even when the past stayed heavy. Word spread about Jimmy's paintings outside the prison walls. Miss Evelyn sent photos to local newspapers and veterans groups. Slowly, a community began to notice, a small-town America that understood sacrifice and second chances. One chilly December day, a letter arrived. Not from Lila or Emily, but from the Montgomery Veterans Center. We saw your work. It read. We want to help you hold a show, inside the prison, for fellow veterans and community leaders. Jimmy showed Calvin. They want to see this place differently. Calvin smiled. Maybe they'll see us differently. The prison began buzzing with quiet excitement. Inmates talked about the art show like it was a lifeline. For some it was. Jimmy kept painting. Each stroke told a story of loneliness, sacrifice, and hope. And outside, a daughter wrestled with forgiveness. The days leading up to the art show were tense. Jimmy couldn't escape the ghosts that haunted him, the choices, the pain, the years lost. One afternoon, as he painted a portrait of a young soldier staring into the distance, the memory hit him like a freight train. Vietnam. The firefight. The chaos. The friend he'd lost, Tommy, the one who begged him to run, who died while Jimmy froze, paralyzed by fear. Why didn't you save him? Jimmy whispered, brush trembling. Calvin approached, voice steady. You were a kid. We all did what we could. The weight of guilt pressed hard, but something shifted. Not forgiveness yet, but the first step, understanding. That night, Jimmy wrote in his journal, something he hadn't done since before prison. For Tommy. For all the lost boys. I paint for you. His art became not just an outlet, but a tribute. The day of the art show arrived with a chill in the air, the kind only small-town winters can deliver. The prison gym had been transformed, rows of folding chairs, a makeshift stage, and paintings lined along the walls like silent storytellers. Jimmy stood near his works, heart pounding. He hadn't expected to see so many faces from outside, veterans, community leaders, even a few local journalists. But most of all, there were inmates, many of whom had never felt seen before. Emily was there too. She'd come quietly, unsure of how to bridge the gulf between past pain and present hope. As the crowd settled, Miss Evelyn stepped up and spoke softly about the power of second chances, the courage it took to open wounds and create beauty from them. Then Jimmy was invited to speak. His voice cracked at first. I used to think my life was over the day I lost my freedom. But through paint, I found pieces of myself again. And through this, I found my family. Emily watched, tears blurring her vision, as the man she'd long buried opened his heart in a way only art could. After the applause faded and the crowd began to disperse, Emily found Jimmy near the back wall, his eyes fixed on a painting of a sunrise breaking over a broken fence. Dad, she said softly. Jimmy turned, surprised but steady. I'm proud of you, she admitted, her voice thick. Not just for this, for trying. For fighting. He swallowed hard. I'm proud of you too, Emily. For coming back. For a moment, they stood in the quiet space between past and future. Then she reached out, taking his hand. It wasn't a perfect bridge, but it was a start. Weeks turned into months. The art program thrived inside Holman, growing into something bigger than anyone expected. Veterans who never spoken about their pain began sharing stories through brushstrokes and colors. Jimmy's paintings were no longer just personal memories. They became symbols of resilience, of quiet strength born in the darkest places. Emily visited often now, bringing Aaron along. Watching her father teach her son how to hold a brush felt like a balm to her heart. One afternoon, as Jimmy and Aaron painted side by side, Emily caught her father's gaze. "Dad," she said, "do you think you can ever really make up for lost time?" Jimmy smiled, weathered but warm. "No. But maybe I can make the time I have count." And in that moment, surrounded by paint, family, and second chances, the years of silence began to unravel. The years Jimmy spent behind bars taught him about justice. Not the kind doled out by courts, but the deeper kind that comes from within. One cold morning, he received news that shook him. The man whose life was taken in the fight that sent Jimmy to prison had passed away years ago, quietly, after decades of hardship and regret. Jimmy sat in his cell, the news settling over him like a heavy fog. "I'm sorry," he whispered, not just to that man's memory, but to himself. Yet he also realized something profound. The world has its own way of balancing the scales. Sometimes, kindness is the only justice we can offer ourselves and others. And through his art, his reconnection with Emily and Aaron, and his friendship with Calvin, Jimmy finally felt that balance begin to tip. Karma's hand was quiet but sure. Jimmy stood before his final painting in the prison art room, a simple image of an open gate leading into a wide, sunlit field. The brush in his hand was steady now, every stroke purposeful. He thought of the years lost, the mistakes made, the bridges burned. But also of the ones rebuilt, the love rediscovered, and the peace found in forgiveness. Emily and Aaron had promised to visit again next week. Calvin was working on a mural for the Veterans Center, a testament to survival. Jimmy smiled, feeling something he hadn't in a long time: hope. His life wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was his. And through the colors and canvas, he had reclaimed it. The gate in his painting wasn't just a symbol of freedom. It was a reminder that sometimes, the hardest battles lead to the brightest new beginnings. He set down the brush. And for the first time, Jimmy Rayburn felt truly free.